I opened my banking app and froze in place, staring at a zero balance as if the numbers themselves were screaming at me. Mark Thompson had always thought of himself as a man in control, someone who managed life with steady hands and careful planning. But that morning, all of it unraveled in a single, impossible moment. He had woken up like any other Saturday, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors of their suburban home in Austin, the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the background like it always did. Jessica had already left, or so he assumed, her schedule typically starting early with appointments and errands. Yet now the absence felt heavier, tinged with unease. The phone in his hand vibrated again, a notification from the bank repeating the cruel truth. Every account, every savings, every emergency fund, completely drained. His pulse spiked, each beat a hammer in his chest. He set the phone down, tried to breathe, the air thick and unrelenting. The sun reflected off the polished kitchen counters, casting patterns he had never noticed before, ordinary details suddenly sharp and accusing. Memories of quiet mornings, their shared laughter over burnt toast, and the comfort of small routines flashed through him, colliding violently with the stark, digital confirmation of betrayal. He wondered if he had missed signs, tiny clues hidden in Jessica's behavior over the past months. The way she lingered on online shopping apps just a little too long, the hurried whispers on phone calls when he entered the room, the casual mentions of purchases that seemed out of place. He had told himself he was imagining it, that she was just indulging herself, that everything was normal, but now the pattern snapped into clarity, impossible to ignore. Mark's mind raced through every interaction from the past week, the subtle excuses, the late nights away from home that seemed inconsequential at the time, but now screamed a different story. He moved to the living room, scanning the space as if it might contain an answer, the soft hum of the air conditioning offering no comfort, only amplifying the silence around him. The photographs on the walls, their wedding, family vacations, birthdays, suddenly felt like accusations, frozen smiles that hid secrets he had been too trusting to question. The realization was almost surreal. He had always believed in shared responsibility, in partnership, in a trust built over years, and in one swift, impersonal moment of digital proof, that trust had been shattered. He sat down at the kitchen table, fingers interlaced, staring at the blank countertop, trying to make sense of the numbers, of the audacity, of the life that Jessica had quietly dismantled. The calm exterior he had maintained for so long, the steady demeanor, the reassuring smile, the controlled voice, felt useless against the torrent of disbelief and anger that welled up inside him. He thought about the upcoming week, bills to pay, commitments to meet, the obligations he had never imagined would become so precarious, and the suffocating weight of uncertainty pressed down, yet beneath it, a spark of resolve began to form. Mark was not a man who panicked. He never had been. And while the sting of betrayal cut deep, a part of him recognized the opening of a chapter that would demand clarity, strategy, and measured action. He could feel the pulse of determination rising beneath the shock, the slow, steady rhythm of a man who had faced challenges before, a man who understood that in moments like this, composure was a weapon. As he ran his eyes across the room, the ordinary became extraordinary, the mundane details, the coffee mug, the newspaper, the soft click of the ceiling fan, each a reminder of the life he intended to reclaim, piece by piece, step by deliberate step. He took a deep breath, exhaled, and whispered to himself, almost as a vow, almost as a warning, that he would navigate this, that he would respond, and that he would ensure justice in the only way that mattered, through patience, precision, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. Mark did not call Jessica right away, and that decision may have saved him from becoming the version of himself she expected. He left the phone on the kitchen table and stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet mechanics of the house he had worked so hard to keep steady. The air conditioner breathed through the vents. A sprinkler clicked somewhere across the street. A neighbor's dog barked twice and then went silent. Everything outside moved as if nothing had happened, as if a man had not just discovered that years of savings had vanished before breakfast. He walked to the sink, turned on the cold water, and let it run over his hands until the numbness in his fingers matched the numbness in his chest. He was 42 years old, a senior logistics manager for a construction supply company, the kind of job that did not sound glamorous but kept half the city moving. He knew schedules, shipments, invoices, routes, deadlines, and problems that became expensive if a man reacted too late. His whole career had taught him one thing: panic wastes time. So he dried his hands, sat down, and opened his laptop. The bank website loaded slowly, each second stretching thin. When the account page appeared, the numbers were just as empty as the app had shown. Checking account, $0.12. Savings account, $0. Emergency fund, $0. A home repair account they had started 3 years earlier after the water heater died in January, $0. Mark stared at those lines until they blurred. It was not just money. It was every delayed vacation, every lunch he packed instead of buying, every weekend overtime shift, every quiet decision to be responsible now so they could breathe easier later. Jessica had not just taken cash. She had taken proof of his restraint and carried it somewhere he could not see. He clicked into the transaction history. The first transfer had happened at 6:42 that morning, then another at 6:46, then 3 more before 7:10. Not random withdrawals. Not a mistake. A clean sweep. Each transfer had gone into an account he did not recognize, ending in numbers that meant nothing to him. But the name attached to the receiving bank hit him like a cold hand on the back of his neck. Lone Star Premier Credit Union. Jessica had mentioned that place once, casually, almost too casually, while pouring herself a glass of iced tea 2 weeks earlier. She said a woman from her book club had gotten a great rate there. Mark had nodded and kept reading the electric bill. At the time, it was nothing. Now it felt like a breadcrumb left by someone who believed he would never look down. He leaned back, rubbed his jaw, and forced himself to keep breathing through his nose. The house around him began to change shape in his mind. The white sofa Jessica insisted they buy because it looked mature. The framed print above the fireplace she called an investment piece. The new luggage by the hallway closet that he had barely noticed when it arrived on Thursday. He stood and walked toward it. The tag was still looped around the handle. Expensive brand. Soft shell. Large enough for more than a weekend. Beside it, tucked behind a stack of reusable grocery bags, was a small envelope from a travel agency in South Congress. He did not open it at first. He only stared at it, feeling the old loyalty inside him argue with the evidence in front of his eyes. That was the strange cruelty of betrayal. Even when truth stood in the room wearing its own name tag, love still tried to negotiate. He opened the envelope. Inside was a printed itinerary for 2 adults, Austin to Miami, departing Monday morning. Hotel reservation near Biscayne Bay, 5 nights, ocean view, prepaid. The second traveler's name was not listed, only initials. M.R. Mark read it once, then again, then set the paper on the console table with care, as if sudden movement might make the whole morning worse. He had questions, but they no longer felt like questions for Jessica. They felt like questions for records, dates, bank logs, signatures, and people paid to know when a line had been crossed. He picked up his phone and found 3 missed messages from her, all sent before he had checked the account. The first said, "Busy morning, do not wait up for lunch." The second said, "I need space today, please do not make this hard." The third was shorter. "You will understand eventually." Mark almost laughed, but no sound came out. That last message told him something important. She did not think she had stolen from him. She thought she had escaped him. She thought the money was a bridge to a cleaner, brighter version of her life, one where she could step across and leave him standing on the wrong side with the bills, the house, and the silence. He placed the phone screen down. For a moment, his reflection stared back at him from the dark glass of the microwave door. Tired eyes, gray at the temples. A man in an old Texas Longhorns shirt standing barefoot in a kitchen that suddenly felt like a courtroom waiting to open. He did not yell. He did not chase her car. He did not send a message he would regret. Instead, he opened a folder in the bottom drawer of the desk, the one Jessica always called his boring grown-up drawer. Mortgage papers, insurance records, tax returns, bank agreements. The kind of documents nobody respects until life turns sharp. One page caught his eye, and as he read the clause near the bottom, the room seemed to steady around him. Joint account protection protocol. Unusual transfer review. Fraud dispute window. His thumb pressed against the paper. He was beginning to understand something Jessica had not considered. Moving money was easy. Proving you had the right to keep it was something else entirely. Mark spent the next hour going through each document with meticulous care, cross-referencing account numbers, dates, and amounts, feeling a strange mix of anger and clarity settle over him. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, the sound grounding him as he worked, each detail reinforcing that this was not an accident, not a misunderstanding. He made a list of every transaction that did not match the normal flow of bills and expenses, every transfer that left the household accounts in an impossible state. Each entry in the spreadsheet he created felt like a marker on a path that he would follow with precision, leaving no room for doubt or error. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, spilling through the blinds and illuminating the white walls with harsh clarity. He could hear a lawnmower start somewhere down the street, the suburban morning moving forward without knowledge of the upheaval inside this home. Mark sipped a cup of black coffee he had made while reviewing the account records, the bitter taste sharpening his focus. He had always been organized, methodical, a man who believed that preparation and knowledge were more powerful than impulse or anger. Now, those skills were all he had to reclaim what had been taken from him. Each calculation, each verified transaction brought a sense of control back into the room. He noted that the transfers to Lone Star Premier had been done in rapid succession, suggesting premeditation and awareness on Jessica's part, and the pattern showed sophistication rather than carelessness. Mark leaned back in his chair, letting the chair creak under his weight, and studied the wall calendar with its neat squares filled with reminders, appointments, and small notes, reflecting on the way their lives had been intertwined with routine and responsibility. The calendar, once a symbol of shared life, now highlighted what he had missed: the subtle shifts in Jessica's schedule, the unexplained absences, the sudden need for extra cash for spontaneous outings. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the sounds of the house, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a dog, settle around him. He pictured the moment he had opened the app, the stark, empty numbers flashing back, and felt a pulse of determination rise. Mark did not need to confront her yet. He needed evidence, preparation, and clarity. He needed the steps lined out before any conversation could begin, a strategy that would ensure the outcome was not left to chance. With his laptop still open, he drafted a series of secure communications to the bank, outlining the transactions, questioning the unusual patterns, and requesting a freeze on the suspicious account until verification could be completed. Every word was deliberate, each sentence chosen to convey precision and authority. As he drafted, he felt the familiar sense of control returning, the way a conductor feels while guiding a complex orchestral piece, each instrument in its proper place. Mark reviewed every document he had, from bank statements to account agreements to joint account protection protocols, ensuring that he understood not only what had happened, but also what legal and procedural avenues were available. The thought of what would happen when Jessica discovered the freeze and the review of her accounts did not thrill him. It was not revenge in the emotional sense. It was rectification, a return to order. The morning wore on, sunlight moving across the floor, highlighting the hardwood grain and casting long, purposeful shadows across the room. Mark moved through the house with deliberate care, each step measured, each action purposeful. He gathered all the documentation into a single folder, a record of events that would stand unchallenged, a preparation that was more powerful than confrontation alone. For the first time that morning, a slow, steady sense of calm began to replace the initial shock. He was not powerless. He was not naive. He had knowledge, evidence, and strategy, and he understood that patience, precision, and composure would ensure that he regained not just the money that had been taken, but also control over the life that Jessica had attempted to dismantle. As he stacked the folder neatly on the counter, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, feeling the rhythm of his own heartbeat align with the purpose he had set for the day, knowing that when action came, it would be measured, deliberate, and decisive. By noon, Mark had made his first call to the bank, and the woman on the other end had a voice calm enough to make disaster sound procedural. Her name was Denise Walker, Senior Fraud Specialist, and she spoke in the measured tone of someone who had heard panic before and knew not to feed it. Mark gave her the account numbers, the transaction times, the receiving institution, and the exact language from the joint account agreement. He did not embellish. He did not accuse Jessica by name until Denise asked who had initiated the transfers. Then he said it plainly, "My wife, Jessica Thompson, is the only other authorized user, and I have reason to believe these transfers were made as part of an attempt to remove marital funds without disclosure." The line went quiet except for the faint clicking of keys. That silence felt different from the silence in the house. This one had weight and movement, like machinery turning behind a locked door. Denise asked whether Mark still had access to the email tied to the account, whether he had received any verification codes, whether any recent address change or security change had been requested. The questions came clean and sharp, and with each answer, Mark felt the shape of the morning harden into something official. Yes, he had access. No, he had not approved any changes. No, he had not received verification codes. Yes, the transfers had emptied accounts used for mortgage, utilities, insurance, and household obligations. Denise paused again, then said the words that made his hand tighten around the phone. "Mr. Thompson, based on the pattern and the amount, I am escalating this for immediate review." Mark looked across the kitchen at the envelope from the travel agency, still sitting on the console table like a confession that had learned to print itself. He thanked her, but his voice sounded distant, older somehow. Denise explained that the receiving bank could be contacted through the internal fraud network, that suspicious transfer reversals were not guaranteed, but time mattered. She also advised him to file a written dispute and notify a family law attorney, not because the bank took sides in a marriage, but because documentation changed everything. Documentation. That word landed in the room like a tool placed on a workbench. After the call ended, Mark sat still for a long time, staring at the call duration on his screen. 27 minutes and 14 seconds. That was how long it took for his private humiliation to become a case number. He wrote the number down on a yellow legal pad, underlined it twice, and placed it inside the folder. Then he opened Jessica's messages again. "I need space today. Please do not make this hard. You will understand eventually." He read them not as a husband anymore, but as a man trying to understand intent. The wording was too clean, too prepared, like she had expected anger and wanted to label it before it arrived. He imagined her somewhere across town, maybe in a coffee shop, maybe in the passenger seat of a car, watching her own phone and waiting for him to explode so she could point to the smoke and call herself the victim. That realization brought no comfort, only focus. Mark walked through the house again, this time noticing what was missing. The blue overnight bag from the laundry room, her favorite leather jacket, the framed picture of her mother from the upstairs hallway, the small jewelry case that usually sat on her dresser. Not everything, just selected pieces, the careful packing of a person who planned to leave without making the absence obvious too soon. In the bedroom, her side of the closet looked almost normal, but the gaps between hangers told the truth. Dresses she wore for dinners he was not invited to. Shoes he had seen only once. A cream-colored blazer she bought after saying she needed to start dressing like the life she deserved. At the time, Mark had laughed softly and told her she always looked good. Now that sentence embarrassed him, not because it had been kind, but because he had meant it, and she had already been standing halfway out the door. On the bathroom counter, beside a half-empty bottle of perfume, he found a receipt from a boutique hotel downtown, dated 3 weeks earlier. One night, king room, paid in cash at checkout, but reserved with a card ending in numbers that matched the mysterious transfer account. Mark did not let his mind drift into scenes he could not verify. He simply took a photo, placed the receipt in the folder, and kept moving. That was his new rule. No imagination. No emotional guesses. Only facts strong enough to stand under fluorescent lights in an office where nobody cared about broken hearts. Only proof. By early afternoon, clouds had gathered over Austin, turning the kitchen dim and silver. Thunder rolled somewhere far away, not dramatic, just low and patient. Mark made his second call, this time to Daniel Mercer, an attorney Derek from work had once recommended after his own divorce. The receptionist said Mr. Mercer had one opening at 4 o'clock. Mark looked at the folder, the legal pad, the itinerary, the bank case number, and the hollowed-out accounts glowing on his laptop screen. For the first time all day, he felt the ground beneath him stop shifting. He took the appointment, closed the laptop, and stood in the quiet house with a strange calm settling over his shoulders. Jessica thought the money had given her a head start. What she had really done was leave a trail. At 4 o'clock sharp, Mark sat across from Daniel Mercer in a corner office that smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and old leather chairs. It was not the kind of office Jessica would have respected. No marble wall, no dramatic skyline, no assistant carrying sparkling water on a tray. Just a low bookshelf, a framed law degree from the University of Texas, and a man in his late 50s with silver hair, rolled-up sleeves, and eyes that missed very little. Daniel did not interrupt while Mark explained the morning. He listened with a yellow pad in front of him, pen moving only when something mattered. The emptied accounts, the rapid transfers, the new credit union, the travel itinerary, the hotel receipt, the missing luggage, the messages. Mark laid each piece out in order, and the more he spoke, the less it sounded like a marriage falling apart, and the more it sounded like a plan that had finally stepped into daylight. When he finished, Daniel leaned back and tapped the pen once against the pad. That was not a fight, he said. That was preparation. Mark looked down at his hands. He had expected sympathy, maybe outrage, maybe some rehearsed speech about difficult times. Instead, Daniel gave him something better. Structure. He explained that Texas community property laws were not a free pass to empty joint funds and disappear. He explained that courts did not look kindly on financial moves designed to disadvantage one spouse before a separation. He explained that the bank freeze could matter, but only if Mark moved with discipline and avoided emotional mistakes. No angry texts, Daniel said. No threats. No hallway arguments. No showing up where she is. From this minute forward, you communicate like every sentence will be read by a judge with a cup of coffee in his hand. Mark nodded slowly. The words were simple, but they settled into him like rules for surviving a storm. Daniel made copies of everything, then asked a question that tightened the room. Has she mentioned divorce before? Mark stared at the floor for a second too long. The answer was yes, but not the obvious kind. Jessica had never said, I am leaving you, not directly. She preferred softer weapons. I feel trapped. I deserve a bigger life. We are not the same people anymore. You are comfortable being ordinary, Mark. At first, he had treated those sentences like weather, unpleasant but temporary. He thought marriage had seasons. He thought love meant standing in the rain until the sky cleared. But now, sitting under the fluorescent lights of Daniel Mercer's office, those memories rearranged themselves into evidence. He remembered a dinner at a steakhouse near Lake Travis 6 months earlier, Jessica swirling a glass of iced tea and saying she could not spend the rest of her life budgeting around what made him feel safe. He remembered her laughing with a woman named Marissa from her book club, a real estate agent with a bright white SUV and a voice that treated husbands like outdated furniture. He remembered Jessica coming home from those gatherings different, polished, and restless, as if someone had shown her a brochure for a life where Mark was only a line item to be removed. Daniel wrote down Marissa's name. Mark did not ask why. By then, he understood that small names could become large doors. The attorney slid a tissue box closer without making a performance of it, but Mark did not take one. He was not crying. That surprised him. He had cried when his father died. He had cried the night their old golden retriever, Cooper, was put down after 14 loyal years. But here, with the evidence of betrayal stacked beside him, something inside had gone quiet and hard. Not cold exactly. Clear. Daniel told him the next step would be filing for temporary financial orders, notifying the court of the transferred funds, and requesting preservation of marital assets. He also recommended that Mark open a new individual account for his paycheck before Monday, reroute automatic deposits, and secure personal documents. The list should have overwhelmed him. Instead, it gave him traction. For men like Mark, motion helped. A checklist was a rope across deep water. When the meeting ended, Daniel stood and shook his hand. You have more leverage than you think, he said, but do not waste it by trying to win an argument in the driveway. Let the paperwork speak first. Mark stepped outside into the late afternoon heat, the Austin sky bruised with storm clouds over the parking lot. His truck sat under a live oak tree, dust across the hood, ordinary and dependable. He got in, closed the door, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Jessica. For a moment, he watched her name glow on the screen, remembering the woman who once danced barefoot in their first apartment because they had finally bought a used washer and dryer. Then the call ended. A message appeared. Mark, this is getting ridiculous. I need access to my money. He read it twice. My money. Not our money. Not what happened. Not are you all right. Just my money. He placed the phone face down, started the truck, and drove home through the first drops of rain. Knowing the woman who thought she had stepped into a new life had just discovered the door behind her was not as open as she believed. The rain had begun in earnest, a steady curtain of silver falling over the suburban streets of Austin as Mark drove slowly toward home. The windshield wipers cut through the drops in a rhythm that seemed to mirror his heartbeat, steady, deliberate, unshakable. Every turn, every stoplight, and every familiar landmark felt charged with the knowledge of what had happened that morning. He had been betrayed, yes, but not defeated. The office of Daniel Mercer had provided clarity, and with that clarity came the quiet power of preparation. Mark thought about the folder of documents stacked neatly on the passenger seat, each paper a piece of armor, each receipt a potential shield. He imagined Jessica discovering the freeze on her account and the official letters already being drafted. She had assumed she could act freely, move quickly, and that the consequences were delayed, but she had underestimated the infrastructure, the legal channels, and the measured patience of a man who had spent years building a life rooted in responsibility. He turned onto the street in front of their house and noticed the subtle changes that had once been invisible. The way the lawn had grown uneven, the new trim around the windows, a package from a subscription service waiting on the porch. Every detail was a reminder that life moved continuously, that time did not wait for betrayal, and that the home itself carried the history of both care and neglect. He parked the truck under the familiar live oak, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment, letting the rain beat lightly against the roof. In the back of his mind, he considered the timeline. Transfers at 6:42, 6:46, and several more before 7:15, all calculated, deliberate, purposeful. He had documented everything, from bank statements to travel receipts, from suspicious email logs to unusual purchases that now had context. Context that formed a complete narrative, not one open to interpretation or impulse. As he stepped inside, the smell of coffee lingered faintly, a ghost of the morning routine that had seemed normal just hours earlier. He walked directly to the folder on the counter, ran a thumb along the neatly stacked edges, and allowed himself a moment to breathe. He was not angry in the way he had expected to be. The emotion had been converted into focus, a form of power that did not rely on yelling or confrontation. Instead, it demanded patience, observation, and a meticulous adherence to detail. Mark sat down at the kitchen table, opened his laptop again, and cross-referenced the account numbers with online banking records, noting any discrepancies, any subtle red flags, any minor irregularities that might otherwise have been overlooked. He typed methodically, his fingers moving deliberately across the keyboard, and as he worked, he began to see the pattern of Jessica's behavior emerge not as a series of isolated incidents, but as a calculated sequence designed to remove him from the equation entirely. He leaned back in his chair and allowed the visualization to take shape. Jessica assuming access, timing transfers, planning purchases, and perhaps most tellingly, leaving trails that she assumed he would not follow. Mark smiled faintly, not because of pleasure, but because he finally saw the extent of control he possessed. Each trail she left, each receipt, each itinerary, each message became a lever, and he knew precisely how to apply pressure without misstep. Outside, the rain fell harder, a drumbeat against the windows, but inside, the house felt silent and secure in its own rhythm. Mark reviewed the itinerary once more. Dates, locations, hotel, prepaid arrangements, and the absent second name, initials only. The clarity of evidence gave him a sense of equilibrium that he had not felt in hours. He made a note to cross-check the hotel's booking system and the credit card records that tied back to the suspicious account. Every action was deliberate. No rush, no emotion, just the slow accumulation of facts, a quiet orchestration that would ensure accountability. By the time he placed the laptop aside and allowed himself to stand, the storm outside had intensified slightly, but he did not notice. His attention was fully focused on the folder, the legal notes, the spreadsheets, and the certainty that when he acted, it would be precise and measured. Mark walked through the living room, noting the placement of furniture, the small gaps in Jessica's wardrobe, the empty spaces on shelves where packages had been removed. The evidence was all around him, yet still he maintained composure. This was not about confrontation in the moment. It was about building a framework, laying the foundation so that every move she made next would be countered by preparation, documentation, and calm decisiveness. He moved to the dining room, looked out the window at the wet street, and for the first time felt a sense of readiness, a confidence born not of force but of strategy. The rain fell, the house was quiet, and Mark Thompson finally allowed himself to imagine the steps ahead, each one planned, each one deliberate, and each one ensuring that the morning's betrayal would not determine the day, the week, or the outcome of his life. Mark spent the next several hours organizing the folder and cross-referencing every detail. Receipts, bank statements, hotel itineraries, email logs, and text messages were aligned chronologically, each placed in its own labeled sleeve in the legal folder. He had created a table in a spreadsheet, listing every transfer, every merchant, every location where purchases had been made, and he color-coded them by urgency and impact. The storm outside had grown heavier, but inside the house, Mark worked in quiet focus, the sound of the rain hitting the roof providing a rhythm for his thoughts. Each entry in the spreadsheet represented not just money, but a marker of intent, a breadcrumb trail of decisions made without his knowledge, a map of the morning's betrayal. He noticed patterns, small details that revealed how Jessica had timed certain transfers when she knew he was occupied, when the system would not immediately flag unusual activity. He marked those times with a different color and made notes for his attorney about their significance. Mark also cross-referenced email notifications, noting which confirmations had been sent to the account on file and which had bypassed his inbox entirely. Each inconsistency was a piece of the puzzle, and as he worked, the fog of shock began to lift, replaced by clarity and purpose. He did not check social media. He did not call friends. He did not pause to imagine what Jessica might be doing. He focused entirely on what he could control. By early evening, the folder was complete. He stood and stretched, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. The house was quiet except for the rain, and for the first time that day, he allowed himself to take a step back and see the situation in full scope. The evidence was undeniable, organized, and ready for presentation. He knew exactly what he would say, in what order, and the documents themselves would speak louder than any words he could muster in anger. He also reviewed personal records, checking that all automatic payments for utilities, mortgage, and insurance were redirected to his own accounts, ensuring that no further surprises could arise in the coming days. The preparation gave him a sense of grounding that had been absent since the first notification. He prepared a written summary for Daniel Mercer, outlining the timeline, the amounts, the recipients, and every supporting document. It was precise, concise, and unemotional, a narrative in numbers and verified facts. As night fell, Mark moved to the kitchen and made a simple dinner for himself, sitting at the table with the folder open beside him. He ate slowly, methodically, letting the evening settle over the house while reviewing the plan for the next morning. Each step had been thought through: the call to the bank, the filing with the attorney, securing his own accounts, and creating a timeline of events to ensure clarity in any potential proceedings. The weight of the morning had shifted from panic to control. By the time the rain slowed to a steady drizzle, Mark had gone through the folder twice, revisiting each detail, confirming each fact. He set the documents in a neat stack on the counter, closed the laptop, and finally allowed himself to sit back, feeling a calm determination fill the space that shock and anger had previously occupied. He was not worried about confrontation, not yet. His focus was on preparation, on order, on ensuring that every move he made would be deliberate and grounded in evidence. The quiet in the house, the diminished sound of the rain, and the certainty of his preparation combined to form a rare moment of clarity. Mark understood that this was a test not of anger but of discipline, and that the morning's chaos could now be transformed into a strategy that would safeguard his interests and ensure accountability. He glanced at the clock. It was approaching 10 p.m., and the house was still except for the occasional hum of a refrigerator or the distant sound of a car passing down the street. Mark Thompson leaned back in his chair, looking at the organized folder, the color-coded spreadsheet, and the printed itinerary, and felt for the first time that he had regained some measure of control, the kind that comes from understanding, preparation, and calm decisiveness. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world wet and quiet. But inside, a different kind of calm prevailed, one that marked the transition from chaos to strategy, from reaction to deliberate action, from uncertainty to the firm knowledge that the next steps would be taken with precision and patience. The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen, illuminating the folder of documents that Mark had meticulously prepared the night before. He had made coffee and poured it into a simple ceramic mug, the steam rising like a signal of focus and intention. Sitting at the table, he opened the laptop and began drafting a formal letter to the bank, outlining the suspicious transfers, the amounts involved, the times, and the accounts affected. He referenced every receipt, every itinerary, and every message that he had cataloged, making sure that nothing could be misinterpreted or overlooked. Each sentence was deliberate, precise, and unemotional, conveying facts without accusation, leaving no room for error. After finishing the draft, Mark reviewed it twice, reading each line slowly, ensuring that the chronology matched perfectly with the attached evidence. He saved the document, printed a copy, and placed both versions in the folder labeled clearly with the date and time. The rain from the previous day had left the streets glistening, the air crisp and clear, a reminder that the world continued its rhythm regardless of personal upheaval. Mark then moved to his office, a small room filled with books, notes, and memorabilia of past projects, and began organizing digital backups of every piece of evidence. He created multiple copies on encrypted drives, stored them in separate locations, and ensured that a cloud backup was in place. The act of safeguarding the data was almost meditative, reinforcing a sense of control over a situation that had initially felt chaotic. Around mid-morning, he received a call from Denise Walker at the bank, confirming that the initial freeze had been applied to the suspicious account, pending verification. Mark listened carefully, asked precise questions about the process, and made notes of the next steps, ensuring that he could respond immediately if any further transfers were attempted. The call ended, and he allowed himself a brief stretch, looking out the window at the quiet suburban street. Neighbors were walking dogs, the sun reflecting off the wet asphalt from yesterday's storm, and the ordinary rhythm of life outside contrasted sharply with the meticulous order. He was imposing inside. Mark then turned his attention to his personal finances, setting up a separate account for his own deposits, redirecting automatic payments, and securing access with stronger authentication methods. Each action reinforced a growing sense of security, a containment of risk that he had previously taken for granted. He reviewed his schedule for the day, planning a meeting with Daniel Mercer later in the afternoon, and considered the potential scenarios that could arise once formal proceedings were initiated. His mind ran through each possibility, evaluating consequences and ensuring that his responses would be measured and effective. By early afternoon, the folder was fully organized, the digital backups verified, and the communications drafted and scheduled. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. The quiet in the house, the light filtering through the blinds, and the rhythm of his own thoughts combined to create a moment of clarity. He was no longer reacting to the shock of discovery, but was instead operating from a position of preparedness and strategy. Each decision, each step, and each document placed him further along a path of reclaiming stability and ensuring accountability. Mark moved through the house, checking that everything was in order, confirming that no detail had been overlooked, and allowing himself a rare moment of calm focus. He knew that the hours ahead would be filled with meetings, calls, and careful coordination, but for now, in this quiet morning, he allowed himself to feel the power of preparation and the assurance that the course he had set would guide the day, the week, and the unfolding process toward a measured and controlled resolution. At 2:30 that afternoon, Mark walked into Daniel Mercer's office with the folder under one arm and a calm expression that felt almost unfamiliar on his own face. The receptionist nodded as if she already knew this was not a casual meeting, and within minutes, Mark was seated across from Daniel while the attorney reviewed the updated documents page by page. The room was quiet except for the soft rustle of paper and the occasional scratch of Daniel's pen. Mark watched him closely, not looking for approval, but for the professional stillness that meant the facts were lining up. Daniel stopped at the bank freeze confirmation, read it twice, and gave a small nod. Then he looked at the hotel receipt, the Miami itinerary, the transfer times, and the message where Jessica had written that Mark would understand eventually. That last one made him pause longer than the others. Intent matters, Daniel said, and this helps. Mark felt those words settle somewhere deep. Intent. For hours, he had been living with the emotional weight of what Jessica had done, but now the shape of it had a legal name, a practical meaning, something that could be written in motions and presented without a trembling voice. Daniel explained that they would file a request for temporary financial orders before the end of the business day, including preservation of marital assets and disclosure of transferred funds. He also explained that the bank's internal freeze gave them leverage because the money had not disappeared into cash or scattered purchases yet. It had moved quickly, but not invisibly. That difference mattered. Mark listened, taking notes even though Daniel said he would send everything in writing. He wanted to hear each step, understand each mechanism, memorize the order of the doors that were opening in front of him. For the first time since Saturday morning, the situation no longer felt like a room collapsing around him. It felt like a building inspection after a storm, damage recorded, weaknesses identified, repairs beginning where they should. Daniel then asked the question Mark had been avoiding. Are you ready for her to know you filed? Mark looked toward the window. Outside, downtown Austin moved under a bright afternoon sky. Traffic rolling along Congress Avenue. People carrying iced coffees. A cyclist waiting at the crosswalk as if ordinary life had not just become extraordinary for one man in a quiet office. He thought about Jessica's message, her choice of words, her confidence that he would fold under guilt or confusion. He thought about the luggage near the hallway closet, the hotel receipt, the missing jacket, the careful withdrawals made before breakfast. Then he looked back at Daniel and said, yes. Daniel did not smile. He simply opened the file on his computer and began working. That was the strange thing about real consequences. They did not arrive with music or shouting. They arrived through forms, signatures, timestamps, and people who knew exactly which box to check. Mark signed where Daniel pointed. His signature looked steady, cleaner than he expected. By 3:15, the filing packet had been sent electronically, and the attorney's office had begun contacting the appropriate parties. At 3:32, Mark's phone buzzed. Jessica. He did not answer. At 3:34, it buzzed again. At 3:36, a message appeared. What did you do? Mark read it, placed the phone on the desk, and said nothing. Daniel glanced at the screen and shook his head slightly. Do not engage yet, he said. Let her attorney call mine. Mark nodded. The next message came a minute later. My card was declined at the hotel. The words sat there glowing on the screen, small and bright, and almost unreal. Mark pictured the Miami reservation, the ocean view room, the life Jessica believed she had already stepped into. He pictured her standing at a front desk, expecting luxury to open like a door, only to discover that the money she had treated like an escape route had become evidence instead. He did not feel joy. That surprised him. He felt something quieter, heavier, and cleaner. Relief, maybe. Or the first breath after being held underwater too long. At 3:41, another message appeared. You had no right. Mark looked at it for a long time. No right. The phrase would have broken him yesterday. Today, it sounded like someone arguing with a locked door. Daniel printed a copy of the filed temporary order request and handed it to Mark. Take this home, he said. Keep your phone on. Do not meet her alone. Do not argue about morality. We are past that. Mark left the office just after 4, stepping into the dry heat of an Austin afternoon. His truck waited under the same live oak, ordinary and dusty, as faithful as ever. He sat behind the wheel and opened his phone one more time. Jessica had sent 5 more messages, each more frantic than the last, shifting from blame to confusion to a brittle version of regret. Mark did not respond. He started the engine, merged into traffic, and drove west with the folder on the passenger seat. The city moved around him in flashes of glass, brick, sunlight, and shadow. By the time he reached home, the house looked different again, not healed, not safe yet, but no longer conquered by silence. He stepped inside, locked the door, and placed Daniel Mercer's packet beside the bank documents. Then he stood in the kitchen where the morning had first opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. The accounts were still empty. The marriage was still broken. The woman he had trusted was still somewhere out there calling his restraint cruelty. But for the first time, Mark understood the truth clearly. Jessica had moved money to build a new life before he could react, but she had built it on records, signatures, and transfers that could be traced. She had mistaken speed for freedom. She had mistaken his silence for weakness. And now, with the bank freeze in place and the legal process underway, the life she thought she had purchased was standing still, waiting for answers she could no longer avoid.